The halls of Stonebridge and Row are filled with whispers and laughter, but Clara Jennings, the janitor, hears nothing. For years, she's been invisible, mocked, underestimated, her worth measured by the uniform she wears. She's the punchline of jokes. No one knows that beneath the surface, she's been quietly watching, learning, and planning. One day, Clara steps into the boardroom, not as the cleaning lady, but as the new owner. The shock is immediate. The power dynamic is shattered. What happens when the person everyone overlooks becomes the one who holds all the cards? They never saw her coming. For 30 years, Clara Jennings walked through the front doors of Stonebridge and Row in a brown uniform, her name stitched neatly above her heart, and a delivery scanner clipped to her hip. People passed her like she was a hallway fixture. Nods were rare, eye contact rarer. But on this particular morning, everything had changed. She entered in silence, no longer in her uniform but a tailored navy blue suit, her silver-streaked hair pinned neatly, her steps measured and firm. Lauren Whitaker at the front desk blinked twice, unsure whether to offer a greeting or ask for ID. Clara said nothing. She no longer needed permission to enter. On the top floor, Peter Halbridge leaned back in his leather chair, flipping through the morning's reports with growing frustration. He didn't look up when Clara entered. "Excuse me," she said evenly, placing a thick envelope on his desk. He glanced up, then stared. "Clara?" he said, puzzled. "From logistics?" "From everywhere," she answered. "And as of this morning, from the ownership board." Peter frowned and reached for the envelope. His eyes scanned the contents, documents of shareholder transfers, sealed agreements, controlling interest breakdowns. The color drained from his face. "What is this?" he muttered. "The new reality," she replied calmly. "I'm not here to drop off your mail. I'm here to take your seat." She turned and walked out without waiting for a response. Weeks before that moment, Clara sat alone in her apartment in Decatur, weary but not defeated. She'd just come home from another long day of being ignored, again. Jason Monroe's voice still echoed in her ears. The delivery lady running this firm? That'd be the day. The laughter that followed was cruel, but it wasn't new. Clara had spent a lifetime hearing versions of that same message, some whispered, others bold, but all soaked in the same poison. You don't belong here. She called her daughter that night. Naomi listened quietly as always, then simply said, "Mama, you've let them stay blind long enough. Time to let them see." Clara had nodded, not out of agreement, but out of awakening. That night, she reached into a cabinet above the stove, where she kept the quiet part of her life. An old binder filled with investment records, rental property details, and business notes she'd written in the margins of light bills and grocery lists. She'd spent years studying real estate, finance, and markets, while others assumed she knew nothing beyond box weights and loading docks. Clara wasn't just a delivery woman. She was a strategist who had simply waited for the right board to move her first piece. And now it had begun. After that phone call with Naomi, something shifted in Clara, not with noise or outrage, but with quiet certainty. She no longer wondered if she should act. She knew. She just needed the right door to knock on. And when none opened, she decided she'd buy the building. Clara started where she always did, observation. She had spent decades delivering to the offices of Stonebridge and Row. She knew the rhythms of the place better than its executives did. She watched the client folders pile up, then vanish. She noticed when big-name accounts stopped calling. She noticed the nervous glances exchanged in meetings, the sudden exits of middle managers, the layoffs dressed up as restructuring. The company was bleeding, slowly, quietly, and no one at the top seemed to have a clue. She, on the other hand, had data, records, patterns, instinct, and so she made a call. Valerie Green answered on the second ring. A former investor, sharp as they come, Valerie had once told Clara at a community development workshop, "Don't let the label they give you become the limit you accept." Clara hadn't forgotten that. Now, on the line, she got straight to the point. "I've been watching Stonebridge fall apart from the inside. I know where it's losing money, and I know how to stop the bleeding. But I need leverage, and I need backing." There was a long pause. Then came Valerie's voice, calm but intrigued. "Meet me tomorrow, and bring more than opinions." Clara didn't sleep much that night. Instead, she stayed at the table until dawn, pulling together old spreadsheets, handwritten notes, and a few sealed folders she had tucked away for years. By morning, she had a plan, a real one. Not just an idea, but a strategy. The next day, she met Valerie at a small, private cafe in Midtown. No crowd, no noise, just black coffee, sharp minds, and a folder full of hard truths. Valerie flipped through the pages slowly. You track this yourself? Every quarter. Every account drop. Every leadership failure. You're telling me you know how to turn this place around. I'm telling you I already know how it fell apart. And I know which threads to pull. Valerie leaned back, watching her closely. And what do you want? Clara looked her in the eye. Majority control. It was bold. But Clara was no longer thinking small. And Valerie, after another thoughtful sip of coffee, set the folder down and nodded. You get me proof of share availability, and I'll get you the capital. That was all Clara needed. She started reaching out to forgotten names buried in the company's old annual reports. Early investors who'd long since moved on, retired partners who held silent stakes. She found them in quiet suburbs, coastal towns, and assisted living communities. And she came not as a salesperson, but as a mirror. She showed them what the company had become and offered a clean exit. No drama, just dignity. Some were skeptical. A delivery driver wanting to buy in? But Clara didn't argue. She let the numbers speak. And in time, one signature turned into 2. Then 5. Bit by bit, the company they'd once believed untouchable was slipping into her hands. And no one inside the building had a clue. The morning Clara Jennings walked back into Stonebridge and Row, the sky over Atlanta was pale and quiet, the kind of stillness that settles just before a storm. She stepped out of a black sedan, not her van, and paused outside the building. She had passed through those doors thousands of times before, always with a package, always with a quiet nod. Today there was no uniform, no scanner clipped to her belt. Just a leather briefcase in one hand and ownership papers in the other. Inside, everything looked the same. Too clean. Too perfect. Marble floors, sleek light fixtures, walls filled with photos of men in suits, none of whom looked like her. Lauren Whitaker, the receptionist, looked up and instinctively reached for the sign-in sheet. Then her eyes narrowed in confusion. "Clara?" she said slowly. Clara gave a small smile but didn't stop. "No need to sign me in today, Lauren." The elevator ride to the top floor felt like moving through decades of memory. She thought of every time she'd been ignored, every sideways glance, every cold signature handed back without a word. But none of that sat heavy on her now. She didn't need to carry it anymore. She'd already turned it into something far more powerful. When the elevator doors opened, Peter Halbridge's assistant looked up, confused. "Ms. Jennings," the woman stammered. "Do you have an appointment?" Clara handed her a sealed envelope. "Please deliver this to Mr. Halbridge, and let him know I'll be using the executive conference room in 10 minutes. The assistant blinked. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand." "You will," Clara said gently. "So will he." Minutes later, Peter stood behind his desk, reading the paperwork that had just been handed to him, his hands trembling, his jaw tight. Ownership documents, majority transfer, legal clearance. It was real. He looked up just as Clara walked past his open door, never breaking stride. She didn't need to explain herself to him. Let the papers do the talking. Let the past catch up with them on its own. As she entered the glass-walled conference room, the entire floor grew still. Employees whispered behind coffee mugs. A few stood. Others craned their necks from their offices. Was that her? The delivery woman? No one knew what to say. Clara laid her briefcase on the table, undid the latch with calm hands, and waited. 10 minutes later, the room was full. Executives, assistants, mid-level managers, all of them seated in confusion. Jason Monroe entered last, laughing quietly with a colleague, until he saw Clara at the head of the room. The laughter stopped. She rose. "Thank you for coming," she said. "This won't take long." She let the silence settle. "Let them feel it. My name is Clara Jennings. Some of you know me. Most of you don't. But as of this morning, I am the majority owner of Stonebridge and Row." Chairs shifted. Murmurs rippled. A few scoffed. Jason leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, a smirk creeping onto his face. Clara didn't flinch. "For decades, I watched this company from a position no one respected, but one that saw everything. I saw the missed opportunities, the wasted talent, the arrogance. I saw people promoted for charm instead of results. And I saw others, bright, hard-working people, overlooked again and again." She paused, her eyes briefly meeting Jason's. "I remember every name that laughed, every voice that doubted, but I also remember the numbers. And the numbers say this company has been sinking under poor leadership, outdated methods, and unchecked egos." The room fell quiet. "Change is coming," she said simply. "Some of you will stay. Some of you won't." She closed her briefcase and stood tall. "But from this day forward, I will no longer be walking through this building unseen. Because I didn't come to take up space. She looked around the room, steady, unshaken. I came to take responsibility. The silence in the room was thick, not with disbelief, but with dawning realization. Some stared at the table, others at Clara, unsure of what to say or do. A few looked visibly nervous. Jason Monroe, however, was not one of them. He leaned forward, a practiced smirk tugging at his lips. "So what's this supposed to be?" he said, voice laced with sarcasm. "An inspirational speech? Are we supposed to clap now?" Clara didn't look at him right away. She opened a folder in front of her, methodically flipping to a page marked with his name. She read for a moment, then looked up. "No, Jason," she replied calmly. "You're supposed to listen." He blinked, the smirk wavering. She continued, her tone precise. "You were the lead on the Daxon Tech account. That client represented $4.3 million in annual revenue. We lost them, under your watch." Jason scoffed. "That wasn't just me. It was mostly you," Clara cut in. "There were 3 strategy meetings you skipped, deadlines you missed, and a proposal sent with data that was 6 months out of date. I've got the audit trail right here." She tapped the file once with her finger. Jason's jaw clenched. "Look, I've been here a long time. I know how this business works." Clara nodded. "Yes, and that's exactly the problem." She turned back to the room. "Some of you are here because you're brilliant. Some of you are here because you've coasted. And some of you," she glanced back at Jason, "are here because no one ever held you accountable." Jason pushed back from the table, his voice rising. "This is insane. You think you can just come in here and—" "Yes," Clara said, her voice steady. "I can. And I have." She opened a second folder and pulled out a 1-page document. She slid it across the table toward him. His eyes dropped to it. Termination. His name. Today's date. Final. Jason stood frozen, red rising in his face. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. "No," Clara said. "The mistake was letting you believe you were untouchable." For a moment, no one moved. Then Jason, shoulders stiff, grabbed the paper, shoved his chair back, and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind him. Clara turned back to the others. "Let me be clear," she said. "This isn't about vengeance. I'm not here to punish. I'm here to rebuild. But we're not dragging dead weight into the future." She looked around the table, her gaze sweeping each face. "If you're here to work, to truly contribute, you'll have a place. If you're here to protect your corner, play politics, or cling to power without performance, this won't be your company much longer." She paused, letting it land. "Some of you have never been seen in this place. I see you. I've been you. And I intend to change that." In the far corner, a young black woman in a pressed gray blazer straightened in her seat, her eyes wide, hopeful. A man from IT, who rarely spoke in meetings, leaned forward. The shift was subtle but real. For the first time, the room was listening. After Jason Monroe stormed out, the silence in the room lingered like smoke. Clara let it settle, not out of hesitation, but to give weight to the moment. This wasn't just about a firing. It was about drawing a new line in the sand. She closed the folder and looked out over the team that remained. Most still seemed stunned. A few glanced toward the door Jason had exited through. Others sat frozen, unsure where they stood in this new order. But Clara, now seated at the head of the table where Peter Halbridge had once reigned, knew exactly what came next. "I don't believe in cleaning house just to make noise," she said. "But I do believe in clearing space for better things to grow." She nodded toward the hallway outside. "Some of what's broken in this company is culture. Entitlement. A belief that titles matter more than contribution. That ends today." She picked up a notepad and read off a list of names. "Angela Ramirez, Marcus Hill, Tanisha Blake, meet me in my office at noon." The 3 employees looked up, startled. They weren't executives. They weren't even managers. Angela worked in client services. Marcus was in analytics. Tanisha had been stuck as a junior copywriter for 4 years. "I've watched your work. Quietly. Consistently. You've been overlooked, talked over, and still delivered." Angela's eyes filled. Tanisha covered her mouth with her hand. Marcus gave a small, stunned nod. "I didn't come here to flip desks or hold grudges," Clara continued. "I came here to lead. And leading means lifting up people who've been holding this place together behind the scenes." A ripple of energy passed through the room. Part disbelief, part admiration. Clara could feel it, the narrative shifting. By the end of the day, she had reassigned department heads, initiated a full audit of accounts, and ordered a top-down evaluation of hiring and promotion practices. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply moved, with the precision of someone who had been studying this place longer than anyone realized. Word spread fast. By midweek, desks were cleared. Some left quietly. Others didn't get a choice. But for every exit, Clara made room for a voice that had been silent too long. In the lunchroom, people whispered her name, not with ridicule, but with awe. She really did it. She's not playing around. And for the first time in years, Stonebridge and Row didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like it was finally becoming a company worth working for. The door clicked shut behind her. For a moment, Clara Jennings stood completely still, alone in the space that had once belonged to Peter Halbridge. The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long lines of gold across the thick mahogany desk and leather-bound business books that no one had touched in years. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. The room was quiet, expensive, and perfectly still. It smelled faintly of leather and wood polish, with a hint of arrogance lingering in the air. She walked toward the large desk, slowly, deliberately, and placed her hand on its smooth surface. It felt cold, heavy, not unlike the weight she'd carried for most of her life. This office was the symbol, the corner view, the private bathroom, the personal assistant waiting outside, the silent assumption that whoever sat here must be the smartest, the boldest, the one who deserved the power. She knew better. Clara walked over to the window and looked down at the city, Atlanta, sprawling, complex, alive. She saw the tops of buses she used to ride, the alley behind the building where she used to unload packages, the back door that never once led her through the front of anything. And now here she stood, at the top. She should have felt triumphant, but all she felt was clarity. This wasn't about proving something to them anymore. It wasn't about Jason Monroe, or Peter Halbridge, or any of the names who had never bothered to remember hers. She hadn't done this to settle a score. She'd done it because she could. Because every job she'd worked, every late-night budget she'd balanced, every investment she'd made behind closed doors, was building to this moment. And because there were people still in that building who deserved better. People who showed up early, stayed late, gave their all, and got nothing but silence in return. Clara turned from the window and walked behind the desk, not with pride, but with purpose. There, in the center drawer, she found a sleek brass nameplate, Peter Halbridge, Chief Executive Officer. She turned it face down and slid it back inside. Then she reached into her briefcase, pulled out a plain, unadorned wooden nameplate Naomi had made for her years ago, and placed it gently on the desk. It read, Clara Jennings, lead with honor. She smiled just slightly. There was work to do. And for the first time in her life, no one was going to get in her way. In the weeks that followed, Stonebridge and Row felt like a company being shaken awake after a long, entitled sleep. The executive lounge, once reserved for whispers and empty coffee talk, now echoed with real conversations, cross-departmental meetings, brainstorming sessions led by people whose voices had never reached the glass walls before. People like Angela Ramirez, now promoted to head of client strategy, and Marcus Hill, whose insights into data trends were saving accounts that had been on the verge of collapse. Clara didn't just fill vacant positions, she rebuilt purpose. She called for listening sessions with junior staff. She reopened long-dismissed feedback channels. She tore down the unspoken rules that had made the place comfortable for a few and impossible for many. And when Peter Halbridge officially stepped down, he left with a forced handshake and silence. Clara didn't gloat. She didn't speak about him at all. She simply moved forward. Still, the whispers outside the building buzzed. Some said the board had lost its mind, that the company had gone soft, that a former delivery worker couldn't possibly steer a firm this size. Clara ignored it all, because numbers didn't lie. Within 3 months, client retention was up by 15%. Lost accounts began to circle back. And most importantly, people inside the building started smiling in the hallways again. Not because they were relaxed, but because they were respected. One Thursday afternoon, Clara walked past a group of interns gathered by the elevator. One of them, a young woman with natural curls and nervous eyes, looked at her and hesitated. "Ms. Jennings?" Clara turned warm and direct. "Yes." The girl straightened. "I just wanted to say thank you for being here, for being who you are." Clara's eyes softened. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Now go be everything they think you can't." The girl smiled, wide this time, and the elevator doors closed behind her. Clara turned and headed back to her office, where sunlight still poured through the windows, and the city she loved sprawled endlessly below. She had no plans of staying forever. This wasn't about empire, it was about example. She would stay long enough to leave the doors open behind her, wide enough for others to walk through without lowering their heads. Because Clara Jennings had never been just the help. She had always been the foundation. And now, she was the blueprint. In every building, there are people you walk past without noticing. People whose names you never learn, whose work you never ask about, whose presence blends into the background like wallpaper. Clara Jennings was one of those people. For 30 years, she moved through the corridors of Stonebridge and Row, unseen by the very people she was quietly studying. And when the day came that she stood before them as their boss, it wasn't a surprise to her. It was inevitable. The greatest lesson this story offers isn't about revenge. It's not about rising up to humiliate those who laughed at you. It's about what happens when a person refuses to accept the role the world assigns them, and writes their own instead. Clara didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she was consistent. She paid attention. She worked in silence. She built something beneath the surface, brick by brick, while others chased titles and clung to comfort. And most of all, she never stopped learning, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. There's something deeply American about Clara's story, though not the version we plaster on billboards or dress up in empty slogans. Hers was the quiet American dream, rooted in sacrifice, discipline, dignity, and a long memory of what it means to be dismissed. She grew up during a time when a black woman was expected to clean the floor, not sit at the boardroom table. But Clara knew that what others expect of you has nothing to do with what you're capable of. Her story reminds us that legacy isn't built in applause. It's built in the hard moments, the overlooked tasks, the early mornings, the times you keep going even when the room refuses to see you. She didn't demand respect. She earned it, and she taught others how to earn it too. And maybe that's the deepest truth. Leadership isn't about power, it's about perspective. It's about remembering what it feels like to be at the bottom, and choosing to lift others up once you've made it to the top. Clara didn't just take the office. She redefined what that office stood for. So the next time you pass someone and think you know who they are based on their uniform, their age, or the color of their skin, think again. Because you just might be walking past the person who will one day change everything. Just like Clara did. In every building, there are people you walk past without noticing. People whose names you never learn, whose work you never ask about, whose presence blends into the background like wallpaper. Clara Jennings was one of those people. For 30 years, she moved through the corridors of Stonebridge and Row, unseen by the very people she was quietly studying. And when the day came that she stood before them as their boss, it wasn't a surprise to her. It was inevitable. The greatest lesson this story offers isn't about revenge. It's not about rising up to humiliate those who laughed at you. It's about what happens when a person refuses to accept the role the world assigns them, and writes their own instead. Clara didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she was consistent. She paid attention. She worked in silence. She built something beneath the surface, brick by brick, while others chased titles and clung to comfort. And most of all, she never stopped learning, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. There's something deeply American about Clara's story, though not the version we plaster on billboards or dress up in empty slogans. Hers was the quiet American dream, rooted in sacrifice, discipline, dignity, and a long memory of what it means to be dismissed. She grew up during a time when a black woman was expected to clean the floor, not sit at the boardroom table. But Clara knew that what others expect of you has nothing to do with what you're capable of. Her story reminds us that legacy isn't built in applause. It's built in the hard moments, the overlooked tasks, the early mornings, the times you keep going even when the room refuses to see you. She didn't demand respect. She earned it, and she taught others how to earn it too. And maybe that's the deepest truth. Leadership isn't about power, it's about perspective. It's about remembering what it feels like to be at the bottom, and choosing to lift others up once you've made it to the top. Clara didn't just take the office. She redefined what that office stood for. So the next time you pass someone and think you know who they are based on their uniform, their age, or the color of their skin, think again. Because you just might be walking past the person who will one day change everything. Just like Clara did. What would you do if the person everyone overlooked suddenly became your boss? Clara Jennings' story challenges everything we think we know about status, leadership, and quiet resilience. Have you ever worked with someone who was underestimated, maybe even by you, only to realize later how powerful, smart, or capable they truly were. Share your thoughts, your stories, or someone who inspired you by rising when no one expected them to. Let's talk about the strength of the unseen.